Have you ever done something that was unpopular, but in your gut you felt it was right? My guest today has. Dr. Rick Kesler recently retired, and in our conversation today, he reflects on his years of adventure as a veterinarian.
But I had a lot of positivity in my career.
He's experienced many aspects of our profession, but his ultimate impact was working with cats and dog breeders.
Breeding was the wild, wild west.
And neonatology, both underserved areas of veterinary medicine. Dr. Kesler is full of stories and wisdom, so here is Dr. Kesler. I think that you have a fascinating career journey. You,
I would say convoluted.
A lot of times they are. And I think I only know the tip of the iceberg of all the things that you've been able to do. So this is really just a conversation to get to know you and some of the things that you've learned with your career path, as convoluted or not. So again, sometimes those are the best opportunities that come our way, or the unexpected, weird, coincidences. So when did you know you wanted to go into veterinary medicine?
I worked for veterinarians when I was a young boy. I'm going to say starting around 9, 10. And of course, the kind of jobs that I got to do. My parents, my mother especially, bred dogs. So that was pretty cool as a young boy because, all my friends would come over and want to play with the puppies and play with the dogs, which was, a great thing for me. But on the downside of life, I also had to feed and clean up after them. So that wasn't anything that, as a young boy, thrilled me. So there was the good and bad in that.
What dog breed did your mother?
German Shepherds.
German Shepherds.
Yes, and to this day, I love German Shepherds, and I will tell you that my favorite dog that I have owned was a German Shepherd. He was a state police flunky. He had Panis, and this was many, many moons ago, and I took him, not having any idea what Panis was or what it was going to involve twice a day treatments. But he was such a great dog, and he lived to be 14. So how cool was that?
Wow, that's amazing.
So then in my trek, when I got married, I married a breeder, and that was not why I married her, but she did breed dogs. And if you want to know, they were golden retrievers. And then she got into pugs. And I don't think I really decided to be a veterinarian until I was about 23 years old.
Mm.
I was sort of a high school, I wouldn't say flunky, but high school was never for me. And then luckily or unluckily, the U.S. government gave me a free vacation to Southeast Asia. And when I got back, I didn't really have a career path, but I knew I had to do something. I had a sister who kept saying, you got to do something with your life. And being a veterinarian, which I had, I worked for one, as I stated, but how to become one, I did not know. All they said was get good grades. And so I went to school and I got good grades, and I went to vet school. And at the time that I applied to vet school, the state that I was in, they paid for 4 slots in vet school, and that year was a bad year tax wise, and they decided not to do that. So I applied to medical school and dental school and got in there, but really didn't want to do that. And then finally, the state came through, and so I got into vet school. And schooling came easy to me, but I didn't like school. So during vet school, I worked 2 jobs. I actually, I guess, owned a business, but I did farrier work for horses and dairy cows. Bought a tilt table, went out and did that. And I also worked in a small county hospital in the lab at night. So the good thing about all that is I got out of vet school with very, very little debt. And thinking about how students get out today, I couldn't imagine that. So was I going to work with breeders? Absolutely not. I was going to be a world famous equine veterinarian and go to the Kentucky Derby, and they would all want me to work on their horses. But my wife's career path sort of didn't allow that to happen. So I bought my first practice a month before I graduated. And it's unbelievable today, but I bought it with a handshake, having no idea how I was going to pay for this. It had been a vet clinic, a large animal vet, mixed animal vet clinic for 30 some years. So I figured if he can do it, I can do it. And I was going to do small animal and equine. And then the repro thing, that's where it got convoluted. So my first week in practice, my first night I had to do a C-section, having never done a C-section. And back then, it is not like today. We relied on the breeder to tell us how far along the dogs were. Most times that worked out, sometimes it didn't. And I had methoxyfluorine, and if anyone listening to this has never used methoxyfluorine, those dogs would sleep for a good 2 days before you would send them home. It isn't like today where within a half an hour we send them home because they would just sleep. And methoxyfluorine was an excellent anesthetic, but on the other hand, they didn't wake up quickly. So we had a lot of nursing care, and my wife and I did a lot of nursing care on that C-section. And if you want to know, that C-section, my first night was a Great Dane Basset Hound cross.
Oh, wow.
And the Dane was the stud. Everything came out okay. I was nervous, of course, but everything came out okay. And so I remember that. And then my third night in practice, a young couple who were not breeders, they had a Boston Terrier that I had to do a C-section on. And unfortunately, all of them had cleft palates. So that was kind of sad, and it ruined, those young couple were just totally devastated. And then at the end of the week, I got a call from a medical doctor who bred labs, and his bitch needed a C-section. And so he came in and he was there, and we did the C-section and, got the puppies out, sutured her up. And he goes, "Well, that was crude." And I'm thinking, I thought I did a good job. And his remark wasn't to demean me. It was basically saying how far behind veterinary medicine was in human medicine at that time. And fortunately, he was a neonatologist. I didn't even know what a neonatologist was. But he basically, to this day, is still a friend of mine. And he got me interested in neonatology and helped me, build up at least a practice where we could be interested in that. And then, and this is convoluted, I told you, I think it was on a Friday, I got called out to rope a buffalo calf because it got stuck in a slough, and I was a good roper. So basically I roped it, and I was supposed to tranquilize it and get it out of the slough. And while that was happening, I heard this thundering herd of buffalo, and they were coming right toward me in my truck. Meanwhile, while the owners I saw were hightailing it over the fence. So I did what only a smart veteran do, and I dove underneath my truck. Meanwhile, while they were pounding the truck into oblivion, And finally the owners got the buffalo away and got them so that we could get the calf out and I could get out from underneath my truck. I got paid $35 for that. How much insurance on the truck I had to work, I can't remember, but you can imagine. And that night, I was supposed to give a talk to breeders on parvo, which again, I really didn't know a heck of a lot about. I didn't have much experience with parvo, but they wanted me to talk about it and they paid me $50. And I said to myself, if I can get paid $50 to talk versus 35 to get my truck beat to heck, maybe there is something to this breeder thing. And between the doctor and then the breeder club, who were really happy to have somebody dumb enough to help them, because back then breeders weren't well liked. It's not like they're totally loved today, but they were really not liked back then. So they were happy to have a veterinarian who would work with them. And so I spoke that night. And unfortunately, during my career, obviously working with a gazillion puppies, I learned what parvo was and learned to deal with it. But then I just kept getting speaking engagements in different states. I was licensed at one time in 11 states because I would go and not only talk, but I would help with reproduction in breeders. There just weren't a lot of veterinarians, even theriogenologists back then, that would work on small animal because money was in large animal. And you can see this still today in universities where, that's where the money comes in is large animal. In today's world, and since we're talking about, future veterinarians, there is still a huge demand for breeders wanting to work with veterinarians. So you don't even have to be a theriogenologist. They just want people to be, or veterinarians to be able to understand their needs. And, that is really important. So back to my career, I bought another practice and then another practice, and they just kept growing. So I'm a veterinarian who's never done a dental in his life. I had never really dealt with cancer. If I saw cancer, I just went, go away. There's other veterinarians much better than I do. And I don't consider myself a reproduction vet. I'm certainly not a theriogenologist. I have a ton of experience, but I think there's so much in the breeder world that theriogenologists to this day overlook. And that basically to me is, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but basically when a bitch comes in to heat her needs, how we basically manage and feed her during gestation. Obviously C-sections, and then neonatology until weaning. That is a huge, this is what breeders need. And so many veterinarians, and this is not a slight, this is basically because it's not taught in vet school, is that there are different needs. A bitch has different needs than a pet. And if you only have one breeder in your practice, then I think it's important to at least understand the needs of the bitch and the puppy, and how we go from when she comes into heat versus when they're weaned. So back to my career, after I started talking in different states, states approached me to basically set up um, a business where I were to help them set up standards for breeders at that time. Now, there weren't a lot of standards, and unfortunately, there were a lot of what we would call today puppy mills. My wife and I still talk about some of the horror stories that we saw. So I took it upon myself to help these states set up so when I was able to go visit a kennel, I would help the state people that were setting these up to at least recognize what the needs of the dogs were, as far as space, cleanliness, disinfection, worming protocols, and basically just their environment. And then, and this I did actually take upon myself. I saw so much brucellosis back then that I became, well, as a lot of breeders like to say, I was a broken record when it came to brucellosis. And I worked with the USDA and APHIS to set up standards, and to recognize the testing and why that's so important. And again, there's still a lot of brucellosis out there, but I will tell you this. I always said by the time my career ended, we would have brucellosis under control, which was a fib. I didn't accomplish that, but I was basically 1 year, and I can't remember what year this was, I was paid to go around to just about every state and give talks and lectures on brucellosis. It was rewarding. And then it was frustrating because a lot of breeders, even today, they don't think that brucellosis will ever occur to them. And then there were breeders that were freaked out by what I was saying. And all I wanted to do was bring awareness so they could go back. And then we had veterinarians come too, but have a conversation with their veterinarians so they understood brucellosis. And that was really important to me, because brucellosis is not a fun disease, and it's very emotional for breeders. It was emotional for me, but to have some states who basically, if you reported it, some states were so heavy-handed that it put breeders out of business, and some may say, well, that was a good thing. In some cases, maybe, but I had clients in states where it was so heavy-handed actually killed themselves, and that's how emotional this was for some people. And then on the other hand, I had some clients that actually got brucellosis from their kennels. So to this day, it still is important for me to have veterinarians understand, and vet students understand that brucellosis, they need to understand it more so than they do the testing protocols, because not all tests are created equal, and we have a lot of false positives, false negatives, and to be able to realize that. So I can't say to anybody I picked my career, but I will tell you that obviously reproduction was in my genes, genetically, with my mother and my wife, and obviously somewhere in the back of my mind, it picked me, and it flowed. You know, I guess I'd never turned down an option like, say, with going out and seeing kennels and you know, working with the states to set that up. I could have easily said, no, I don't have any time for that. But I did it because I felt it was so important, and things just grew from there. You know, the more breeders I met, the more requests that came in, and I guess I would say anybody that's interested in reproduction, the world is out there. You just have to go and know a little bit about it. I was asked last week after one of the vet student talks that I gave what my recommendation would be, and you know, they were saying, should I go work for a theriogen? I said no, I wouldn't, not at first. What I would do is go to breeder shows and see if they even interest you, because that's where breeders shine. You learn what they do, what they go through, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of money. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of young people that are turning to breeding dogs. And I told her that if you do that and you're still interested in the breeding world, then go do your therio, or you go and start a practice with that, because they'll come to you. And that was so true of me, is that, everyone said, you had 3 practices, must have been successful. And I was just lucky. And I followed what came to me. And I think in veterinary, and I always have loved veterinary medicine. I talk to too many young veterinarians that are turned off by it. And as you stated earlier, there are so many avenues out there, so many avenues. And if I was a younger veterinarian still having my career, and I talked to Dr. Hughes about this, genetics is huge in the breeding world. And they need to understand it more now that we understand genetics and dog breeding more, and cat breeding. And I never really said much about cat breeders, but cats are kind of like my thing. I'm a cat guy, and I would say that one of the reasons I got in vet school was not only to be a world famous equine veterinarian, is because feral cats, and I live in the country and always pretty much have, fascinated me. As a boy, as a young man, feral cats have just always just fascinated me with their instincts and their predatory behavior, their breeding practices, and their life. I mean, it's a hard life for a feral cat. And the predatory behavior and the instincts carry over to our indoor cats now, because when I started, indoor cats were, a small percentage, and outdoor cats was a large percentage. And now we know that that's turned in for the best, but we also know that we have environmental problems with our cats indoors. Same way with breeding. And I would tell anybody that listens to this that wants to get into it, if they were interested in dog breeding, and I told you that dog breeders were totally in need of veterinarians that understand them, cat breeders they pour their hearts out for a veterinarian who knows and understands cat breeding, because they're not the same as a dog breeder, and there's so many differences. And I would go to a cat show to give a talk, and I was treated like a rock star.
Oh.
And the reason being is because they want that education. They demand that. And again, it's out there. A veterinarian, young veterinarian, could go and do that, and just get invested with the cat breeders and make themselves known, and the world will open up to them, as long as that's what their interests are, because you can't fake it, as you know. Doesn't matter what kind of vet you are, you can't fake it. You're either love doing it or not doing it. And so in my career, that's all the good things. I've seen, I think my wife says that we probably have examined over 1 million puppies. So obviously, I've done that, and I will tell you this, that I hate puppy breath. Just absolutely hate it. But I know there's a ton of people out there that do it. I think it's genetic, but I don't know that for sure. In the same way with kittens, if you're open, the world will open up. But on the other hand, and this is not true today, but veterinarians in certain stages of my career were pretty hateful toward me. And the reason they were hateful was that, they thought I was out there aiding dirty breeders. And I never felt that. I felt like I was always trying to help the dogs or cats. I don't care if they were in a cattery, in a kennel, it was an individual. That was always my goal, was to make them understand, to bring up their level of knowledge. And I've always stated that, and I told veterinarians, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? Somebody's got to do it. And I will tell you that I saw horror stories, but I don't see them today. Breeding doesn't matter what type of breeder you are today, it is so much better than it was. And in my retirement, I sit back and I feel like I played some small part in that, and that makes me feel good. Um, I have friends who still today call, breeding kennels puppy mills, and I said, you have no idea. These dogs, and it just wasn't me. I mean, AKC, USDA, they can all pat themselves on the back to up the game of breeders, and dogs today that are bred are so much better off in so many different ways, medically, reproductively, environmentally, because most of these breeders today work with their dogs and cats early on. So when they do go to a home, they're used to the handling and socialize. So um, it's been a wild trip, and it's still kind of a wild trip. So
Life always is.
yes, yeah, and but I do think there is a ton of opportunities for veterinarians, whether they wanted to do, open up in their practice just for reproduction. And I would say if you want breeders to come, then at night give a talk and
Mm.
listen to breeders. I hear this so often: breeders are so difficult, and I don't find them difficult. I find them, if you give them the respect, because they know their breed. Trust me, most breeders know their breed, and you have to give them that respect. Now, we can certainly have disagreements about, when to worm your puppies, or basically what to feed your dogs, how to feed your dogs, how to social. We can have all those disagreements. But usually, if you sit and talk and be patient, they come. They come to your point of view. And that's worked out with me because I'm not easily kowtowed by a breeder. If I was a new veterinarian, I might be. Um, but I think you just need to be able to listen to them. They're a little bit different than pet owners, but even though I think pet owners have changed, they bring in the papers from Dr. Google and tell you how to do things. But um, I would say in most cases, breeders are wide open to just making their dogs better. That's what they want, or their cats better.
Yeah. And you, it's amazing to understand how well you have built relationships with breeders over the years. And I'm hearing you say it's a lot of listening. Do you have any other advice on just knowing how to build relationships with whether it's a breeder or pet owner?
Well, with a breeder, never tell them what your favorite dog breed is.
Okay. Unless it's theirs, right?
Unless it's theirs, and then the next day it'll be the other breed that's your favorite. I think listening and appreciating what they do. They like pats on the back just like we all like pats on the back. And when I would go to dog shows, um, I, I would be amazed. And cat shows. I mean, cat shows are wild and crazy, and the people are wild and crazy, but they're in love with it, and so it's their passion. And while I can't sit back and say dog and cat shows are my passion, maybe because I've been to too many of them, I don't know. But working with the cats and the dogs and the breeders and seeing just an amazing quality of members of that breed, whatever it may be, that's my passion. And I don't know how many times I would go to lecture at a dog or a cat breeder, and somebody would bring a kitten or a puppy that needed help, and they came to me. And I never lost the sense that how cool that was.
Yeah.
Just absolutely cool. I had and I like telling this story, so I'll tell this story, and because I like telling stories. We were at a pug show, and a Canadian breeder was there. This was in the United States, and she was there, and she brings this pug puppy to me that is just gasping for air. And the veterinarian she saw the day or 2 days before put him on Lasix because They thought it was pneumonia because of the open mouth breathing. And I told her, no, your dog doesn't now. I examined it, and basically, and this is where it comes in, that you really need to understand young puppies before 8 weeks of age, because most veterinarians see 10, 12, that.
Vaccines. Yeah.
Right. And talking to them about different things. But you really need to understand from 0 to 8 weeks of age, or when we wean them. And basically, this puppy had just overeaten. It was colicky. Its abdomen was distended. So I said, I'll hold the puppy. You go to the pharmacy and get some Gas X or some type of gas relief. And I said, we're stopping this Lasix, that's for sure. And within like 3 hours of giving him a drop or two, the dog was perfectly normal.
Oh.
And that's rewarding, even for an old guy like me. But it's really rewarding because the breeder learns something. And I said, and I also told her, you have a good relationship with your veterinarian, obviously, teach them that Lasix doesn't really have a lot of need for Lasix and these young puppies. Because, as you know, they're full of water. They're, when they're born, they're 80% and then 70, and we certainly don't want to dehydrate them. But I just think that's important for veterinarians to know that, because no one taught me that. I always tell the story. People say what you learned in reproduction in school, and this is true. The only thing I learned about cat breeding was, and this is what we were told, that if the tomcat and the queen were in the same county, she would get pregnant, which we know today is totally nonsense. And what I learned about dog breeding was nothing, absolutely nothing. Now, I could palpate a cow and palpate a horse and pigs. I was never a pig guy, but but that's what I learned. So I don't know if students, and from talking to them, I'm not sure they learn much more even today about small animal reproduction.
We get to watch this terrifying video. I'm sure it's still being shown today, of the cat reproduction. And it looks like it was made back in the 80s. At least this is me remembering from vet school. And that was about all I got of cat repro. At least it was very memorable.
Yeah. And on my talks to the vet students that I do, I always tell them, I said, if you even have an interest, go watch YouTube and see cats breeding. I said, it's not wine and roses.
No.
But I said, if you understand feral cats, you will understand why that behavior exists out there. And I don't get to talk about that on my calls with them. I would love to. But if you see that, and you're right, it's terrifying. But if you understand their feral cat behavior, you'll understand the fact that tomcat is a threat to her. And will be a threat to those kittens once they're born. So she doesn't want him around, and doesn't need him around, and that's one of the reasons why we see that. So she's an induced ovulator, and see you later.
I like that. So before we leave your career real quickly, because I do have other questions, what was the bridge to start working with Royal Canin?
Okay. So I started working, I guess, 11 years ago. But I had worked and been affiliated or associated with Royal Canin for like 7 or 8 years before that. Just meeting Royal Canin at dog and cat shows. Mm-hmm. So I would be there to lecture, and then I, went around and tried to meet as many people. And so I knew a lot of the associates from Royal Canin, and, Royal Canin would ask me, and I always liked being my own boss. And I thought I was a good boss because I listened to myself. And my brother, who had worked with Kodak, absolutely told me never, ever work for a corporation, never, because he had such bad experience. And so I put it off and put it off. And then when I got to be 60, I said, what the heck, why not? The Royal Canin, I don't even know what his title was, but he was pretty high up, had come to a breeder show and heard me talk. And we talked for like 2.5 hours afterwards, not just about Royal Canin, but a lot of different things in the world. And he just basically said, I want you to come. And I did. And I don't regret a moment of it. Um, it wasn't hard because basically I did everything I did before. And just different people were paying me. And I still got to practice. Um, and So it was easy for me. I didn't have a lot of demands put on me. You need to go, that you want to go to this show, go to this show. Because, they basically put the trust in me that I knew which shows were positive for Royal Canin. In the beginning, it was just a wild ride. And as it became changed a little bit, it still was good for me. I don't have anything at all negative to say about it. But, when I turned 70, I said, you know what, it's time for me to retire, because a lot of my friends were having either medical issues or passing on. And I just didn't want to pass on while I was working for Royal Canin. So, so that's how. I had just worked with a bunch of people who aren't with Royal Canin anymore 15, 20 years ago. And we had a pretty close relationship. So, and they were out there working with breeders, and I appreciated that. There were other companies that did, but they didn't have the commitment that Royal Canin did to the breeders.
Yeah. And it just sounds like along your whole journey, you saw a need and you filled it. And does it also seem like a lot of times people were coming to you, like you were putting yourself in the place where the need was, but then for a lot of these opportunities like the USDA, I think that's fascinating that you've been able to write so much and speak so much and work with the USDA on the brucellosis. Were people really coming to you and asking you for these opportunities?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like with the USDA, they, and I don't know now if they have it since COVID, but they used to have a breeder seminar once a year, and I would speak at those. So I'll tell you another story, and I'll try to make it quick. But as I told you, when I went around the country with brucellosis, there were non-believers and there were believers. And the last USDA show that I talked at, in the front row was a very, very, very difficult breeder, and always like to argue with me. And I'm sitting here going, why is she here? And why is she in the front row? Because usually she sat in the back. And the USDA introduced me, and she stood up immediately and turned around. And I'll never forget this long. She goes, I want all of you to listen to this man. She goes, I never would. And brucellosis happened to me. And if I would have listened to him, it never would have happened to me. She goes, so learn from me and learn from him. She sat down, and I thought to myself, whoa, this is, I couldn't have said it better myself.
I was going to say, you could have sat right back down.
I could have sat right back down, and those kind of statements always did me good. Not that I didn't like getting paid, don't get it wrong, but I have had a career, and I never faced Facebook or Yahoo, like I hear veterinarians, they get burnt out because of negative stuff, but I never had that in my life. I'm not saying everyone loved me, but I had a lot of positivity in my career. And the other thing I did was I did work for or consulted with two veterinary distributorships, large distributorships, because not that they wanted to know what products that they could carry and market for breeders that I believed in. And they would absolutely, before Royal Canin, they would pay me to go out and talk. So actually, I got exposure, there more exposure than before. So it worked out for them, and it worked out for them, and or for me. But I will tell you this: I've never been really a believer in selling. You know, I've always said I knew I could sell because people listened to me about a product. I had special wormers that I wanted them to use for their puppies. I didn't do that for veterinary marketing. I did that because that's a product I believed in. Um, and unfortunately, there are veterinarians out there in today's breeding world that just sell products, which, yeah, let me back up in the beginning. There was a lot. Breeding was the wild, wild west. There were a lot of homemade products that people would use, homemade foods that breeders would use, and these were traditional. And it's not like that today. It's somewhat like that today, but that was something that I didn't, I won't use the word fought against, but talked against that, there's always a better way. And at this time, let's try to use this product versus, let's making up some homemade concoction. And again, I would just say it's a better world out there because we have these products now, which we didn't have before. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. And I think um it may be a little bit more challenging these days. I think there is some element of being proactive. And I still see that in what you did as well, as you went to the shows on your own too, and you established a relationships and the respect. And that's why I think they listen to you, is you established that relationship first. And I think that is why people started to come to you, as they saw that you had those relationships, that you had the experience. And I think that's why, you had so many people reach out.
and I would also say that going back to, you asked me, if somebody were to, what would I say, is that if I talked about, let's just say parvo, I wouldn't talk down to breeders. I talk about the experiences I had, um, why giving 17 vaccines before they're 6 weeks of age is not the answer, and explain it to them. So my goal was, I spent a week at the, I don't even know what it's called, veterinary vaccine council or the biological council, learning about vaccines, you know, and I would ask them, I say, so, there is this belief out there that, vaccinating once a week is a good thing in the breeder world. And they would say no. And they tell me why. um, you know, this is how vaccines work. This is how the B cells work. And basically, you know, this is what you need to understand. So then I could translate that into going out and explaining that, because I think it's really important, especially with breeders, because that's what we're talking about today, is to explain things to them, not just say, use this product and this is why. Explain how it works, what we're looking for, what may be the downside of it, and that is important to them. And then they'll come along. Same way with nutrition, going
Mhm.
out there and talking about nutrition. Um, I really never talked about Royal Canin unless they asked me. I talked about nutrition. Here's nutrition that's really important. And I have the history of nutrition. I always tell the story that um, my mother's females, by the time we went through weaning, they were a rack of bones. And it wasn't because we didn't feed them. We didn't feed them correctly, and we didn't know how to feed them correctly. And no veterinarian at that time knew how to feed them correctly. Once we and Royal Canin has a big play in this, is that once we learned how to feed our bitch and know that she's actually an athlete and has needs, different needs at different times, that's what's important. Whereas we don't have one step of dog food that can do it all. And that, I always said, I want, and I can do this. I can have a bitch come into heat at the body condition score that I want her to be at. And by the time she goes through weaning, she is at that body condition score. We have that ability to do. We never had that ability. Never. And cats, the number one reason, even today, that I do C-sections on cats is because breeders don't know how to feed them. They're pregnant. Now some do, but there's a wide opportunity out there for veterinarians that, maybe aren't nutritionists, because I'm not a nutritionist. I've just had a lot of help from nutritionists that you go out there and explain nutrition to these breeders, and knowing that raw food and what they feed them is not proper, and then they get it. They get it. But the number one reason that, especially in cats today, is still they just don't have the energy to queen. And it's kind of sad because we have the ability to feed them correctly if we understand it.
Yeah. So for those who might be interested in learning more about neonatology, because I still think this is a need. I still
I
don't
think it's a huge need.
I mean, I still see a lot of gaps here. So for those who are interested, besides going to some, cat and dog shows, which I think is, I would love to go to one. I hope I get the opportunity one day. But I know there are some researchers and groups. There is a neonatology, I believe, conference. It's not every year, right? That
Right.
you and Dr. Fontaine would go to. Is that something you would recommend people to look into?
Well, it is, except for with Dr. Fontaine and I, we used to go out of the country to do that, so that's not always available. Um, it is difficult. Neonatology is a difficult field, and it's a growing field, but there are a lot of people out there that talk about it that don't know what the heck they're talking about. They're still doing, vitamins and supplements, and I heard a story yesterday that I won't repeat, but I spent a good amount of time with the breeder poo-palling it, and why, telling them why. So neonatology, you can find information on it. The University of California, Davis has some. Vet school, and I think they're good. But there isn't just a lot, and I can tell you this, that the reason there isn't is because, again, the vet schools still rely on income, and the large animal is their focus, versus small animal. So I would say this: you need to take it upon yourself at this point in time to learn about neonatology, and there's information out there. I would recommend IVIS, you know, and IVIS has, they might be a little bit older on neonatology, but um, there's still excellent articles there that you can find. And, you know, just reach out and learn about it, and understand that it makes sense. And I don't know if my talks for Royal Canin were recorded, but they certainly can listen to those about neonatology. I just think it's, as you know, you do a C-section, and what happens at an emergency clinic is that's it. They can do the C-section, but they don't really know how to handle from, that first 24 hours or 8 hours. And That's critical. That's why the mortality rate in our breeders has gone down some. It used to be about 25% mortality rate. And, in my practice, I think we're down around 7% right now. You're going to lose some, but we're not going to do everything in our power to lose them. We're going to actually try to help them and do it correctly. And so neonatology, as you said, I don't really know where to go unless they went to the Royal Canin functions.
Well, like I said, there's still a need. So those out there, please, if you're
Yes.
interested, go forth. Breeders are also sources of influence. Being
Yes.
able to educate them and they carry that on to pet ownership, I think is really important.
Yes.
So I highly advocate for supporting this area more and
Yeah.
more.
Along with that, it would be wonderful if more veterinarians worked with breeders because, as you said, breeders are an advocate for those puppies. They've had them for 8 weeks. Now they're going to a new home. They send along information, and a lot of what happens, the breeder or the veterinarian goes, no, no, no. And we don't need to have that happen. We need to be on the same page and work with the veterinarians and understand that. So another opening for veterinarians to do breeding work.
Yeah.
And genetics. My strong point is not genetics, but genetic diversity is going to play a huge role in the future with breeding.
I want to thank you for your years of work so far. I know you're not done, but I think you did make a difference. I think the progression that we do see, I do believe that you played a big part of that. So I want to thank you for that. And before I let you go, I always do like a final rapid fire questions for fun.
Ooh,
Yes. All right, your final questions.
final
Um,
question.
yes. What is something on your bucket list?
On my bucket list.
Yes.
Okay. So while this was going on, I have it on mute, but I've had 5 calls from breeders. I want to be able to someday do something like this and not have any breeder call me and call you or call another veterinarian. I want, I don't want to sound selfish here, but it's time for the younger generation to take over and help these people because I'm willing to help them, but I find it hard to say no. So my bucket list would be no calls from breeders. How about
Well,
that?
maybe we can help. We'll see.
Pretty easy there.
What is a simple moment that brings you joy?
A simple moment that brings me joy. There are a lot of simple, but basically sitting on the front porch with my wife, having coffee and listening to the birds because we have a lot of birds. And we have cottonwood trees, and we both love to sit there and listen to them rattle. So I don't know if it gets much simpler than that, but that's what we like to do.
It's a good time of year for that too.
Yes. So yes, that's what we like to do, and it's simple.
Nice. All right. This one does catch people off guard sometimes. If you could create a law that everyone had to follow, what would your law be?
That no breeder could be without a veterinarian and have a good relationship with that veterinarian, a working relationship. Maybe that's not a law, but that'd be my big wish is that veterinarians and breeders come together and have a wonderful working relationship. And that is, I can make that a law.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good one.
If
Yeah.
I'm the king, I can make the law.
Yep, you were the king of that law. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's critical for breeders, and that's why I think if this helps 1 or 2 or 5 veterinarians that go in that direction, that'd be wonderful because there is such a need. Dog, cat, in between.
I agree.
Yeah.
And finally, what is something that you are most grateful for?
At 70 years of age, I am grateful. I don't know if it's most grateful because obviously my wife and kids and the family, but and grandkids, we have 8 grandkids. Um, I would say I see so many young vets and vet students that complain about veterinary medicine, and I think it, it is a wonderful, wonderful profession, and I just think they need to find their niche in it. And I know it's a different world than when I graduated, but and this is kind of a simple statement, but build it and they will come. I think that occurred to me, and I am very thankful for my career. And as we stated in the beginning, I didn't have it all worked out, um, but it was because I was a veterinarian that it all came together. And just think about this. Um, most of my career, I got to work with kittens and puppies, and who gets to do that?
Not many, although a lot of people think that about
Yes,
veterinarians, right? That we just kiss puppies and kittens all day, but
yes,
you're one of the few that got pretty close.
yes. I did, and to this day, I don't do as many as I used to, but it's still. I am amazed at C-sections, and here we holding that life. And as I told you before, she's going to wake up and nurse them soon. Whereas when I started at 2 days and come on, wake up.
Yes, I'll add my own little story there. First of all, I also agree with you on the puppy breath. It makes me feel so much better to hear you say that, because people look at me like I must be the most evil person on earth who does not like puppy breath. So thank you. Um, but I will say, one of the happiest moments I remember from my internship, which was a small animal rotating internship in a private referral hospital, which was a very hard year of my life. Probably the happiest moment was right after a C-section, when we all got to hold those puppies. And it really does bring a lot of joy.
A lot of joy.
Yeah.
Life is precious. Life is precious.
This has been the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. Whether you are listening or watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure you are subscribed to catch all these amazing people in our profession. Also, send this episode to someone you think would appreciate it. Have a recommendation for someone who would be a good guest? Please reach out on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. There aren't many Dr. Sprinkles. Until next time,